Welcome to Dream Sequence at the Longwood Gallery. My name is Ray Felix. I'm the curator for the Dream Sequence show.
I'm the director of Longwood Art Gallery, and tonight we have this amazing opening reception for artists that work with comics.
This artist is Bedell Tiscareno, originally from Las Vegas, Nevada. He is now a Brooklyn artist. He studied at the School of Visual Arts, and his artwork deals with dreams and also deals with political topics such as like the war in Iraq. And this is called Prayer Group. His work is almost like an exaggerated form of political topics.
My work builds on discursive narratives. So by taking different strings of history and different strings of myth, I combine combinations that begin to flesh out these stories and take on their own sort of interpretations. Because a lot of what we understand now that supports the status quo is basically made up. So I make up on my own, I author history on my own.
This is the work by Gary Camp and Louis Sierra. This is from a series called The Bronx Heroes. It is a comic book history of the Bronx. It takes you from the 1930s to current day. They have different artists portraying a story of a Jewish immigrant who becomes a boxer, who feels he has to prove himself as a Bronx resident. And it takes place in the 1930s when Jewish people did occupy the Bronx around the Grand Concourse and Kingsbridge and those areas. The one by Louis Sierra is a man coming back from the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, and he is coming back to the Bronx, seeing the decay of the neighborhood, the neglect, and feels that he has to make a difference, so he becomes a vigilante to rid the crime on the streets of his neighborhood. Over here, we have an immigrant artist. This is Ed Tricchino. He resides in Allentown Avenue in the Bronx. He originally immigrated from England, and he's lived in the Bronx for close to 5 years now. This is a comic book, League of Amazons, which is a parody about superheroes, and it deals with sexuality and cross-dressing transgendered Americans. It's really a parody in the style of British humor, kind of like a Monty Python, and it was originally published in an Australian comic book about 3 years ago. The other piece here is Chris Torres. He's also a Bronx resident that lives in Riverdale. These are the pages for a new book called DNA Agents, which is about a military espionage type of spy, James Bond type of story, or has influences of early comic book genres like James Bond or G.I. Joe or those type of elements in the story. But it's a modern taking of DNA agents and the adventures that they go through, you know, similar to the television show Cops, but with a little bit more drama. We have David Quiles. He is a Brooklyn artist. David's work usually deals with very dark, and very realistic urban themes, street gangs. This Black Caesar is one of the pieces, and Black Caesar is a character that's about an underground boxing club and the different adventures that takes place within the underworld of Brooklyn.
People look at comic book art and they say it's not art. But you look at the work that's here, it's truly legitimate art forms, very often not recognized by the mainstream, but has a strong following in the community. And in a lot of ways, it represents who we are today. You have the high-end art and the major galleries in Soho and Chelsea, but this is work about the people. This is work about people who understand these types of art forms.
This piece is by Elena Peterson. She is also a Brooklyn artist. Her photographs usually deal with hands. She always focuses on the hands rather than the actual subject matter, the activity of the hands. And it also deals with stitching, femininity, and those traditional roles of the female. This work is by Kasim Earl. He is an illustrator of comic covers, and he usually does fantasy. He's a fantasy artist. His work usually deals with ethnic characters, but in fantastic realms of artwork and stuff like that. You have a lot of like science fiction and traditional. This is like almost like you mixing mythology and the urban, like urban environment, and mixing them together and bringing those two elements into stories. He is not a comic book artist, but he has done some comic work in the past, but he is mainly an artist who loves to do these fictional type of Conan the Barbarian type of paintings, and at the same time putting in this like hidden subtext of Egyptian mythology into his work through the iconographic tattoos that he puts in there in the work. Artist Tim Ryan. This is unlabeled 11 and 14. Tim Ryan is a very unique artist. As a small child, he was burned at the age of 9 months. About 75% of his body was burned. So he was raised as a burn victim most of his life. And as a painter, only having 3 fingers, he beautifully paints these oils, and when he paints these females, he tries to replicate the scars that were on his body, and he tries to project that. This is a part of him, his feminine side and his psyche, and all his female figures have those specific scar marks that are literally on his skin. He tries to replicate the burns, the marks, and the scars from his flesh.
Painting's always been like a window to a world of self-expression for me. I like to manipulate the form. I was in a fire when I was a kid. I was 19 months old, and it's always been a way that I could try to exemplify beauty at the same time manipulate it, kind of like how I was, I suppose. And it definitely talks about objectification, what it is to be seen, and that's about it. I'm just trying to raise some questions, that's all.
This is a work by Ed Mouzon. It's titled Identity and Isolation. The subtext is Clark Kent Syndrome, Peter Parker Principle. It deals with identity and knowing oneself, and that whole alter ego personification that comic books often deal with. It is also an image that is to be used in an upcoming issue of the Bronx Heroes comic. And it deals with one of the characters' internal personalities, that crossover of hero versus being an average regular person. This is by the artist Ruth Fernandez. Its title is Eyes. The artist is trying to express her surrounding world, her perspective of everything that she sees, the culmination of moments. She sees that the world around her is mundane and routine, and while others sum up our essence, her goal is to try to capture the details of the moments which overstimulate our eyes. As an artist, she feels that that we as a society mistake things that are beautiful for ugliness. So she wanted to capture those precious human emotions like loss, pain, hurt, fun, seriousness, real moments which are essentially human, and we sometimes forget as living our day-to-day lives. This is the artist Jean Segura Rosa. The one painting is titled I Agree, the other one is Disappointed. Her work usually tends to deal with her sexuality, her femininity, and these paintings are dealing with the loss of a loved one, the grieving, the pain that humans suffer, and the anguish that we go through, some of the emotions that we go through during that period of time. she's also focuses on the female form as her main focus. She's primarily an illustrative artist. She's a comic book artist, and she's also a fine artist painter, and she straddles both of those disciplines quite delicately.
My background is in illustration and commercial arts and the comics and stuff like that. So doing things like this, I really just do it for therapy. It's very personal.
These are photographs by artist Hetemi Takagi. It is part of a project called the Blender Project. She is an immigrant from Japan residing in Brooklyn. She takes these photographs of food from around New York City. This is the artist Dmitry Gubin. It's oil on stretched canvas, drop cloth, and it's also spray paint, like a can spray paint, enamel spray paint.
I was commissioned to do this work. It's created in spray paint and acrylic and markers. Inspired by a piece by Rousseau, it was a dream with a gypsy. It's based on that kind of piece.
This artist usually focuses on visual language, communications through thoughts and emotions, and it also has a feel of the urban city life in New York City. He uses lines and shapes to try to reflect the urban street atmosphere that you see in the streets of New York, some of the graffiti that you may see, and he combines the line and shapes and try to communicates that in his work. This piece is by Wanda Ortiz. This is part of a series. It's a panel within a giant-sized comic book. She usually does serials, stories of her life, projected through a character named Wepa Woman.
This particular work that you're seeing behind me is an excerpt from the Wepa Woman Exile series, which used to be, well, actually was a comic book series that I've kind of blown up into these large panels or site-specific murals. And in this particular panel, Wepa Woman is experiencing a rather out-of-body experience.
This work is by Ivan Velez Jr. He is an illustrator, and he's also a writer. He has done the comic books. He's worked for Marvel Comics. He wrote for Ghost Rider in the early 90s. And he is a Bronx-born artist, and his work deals with his identity, sexuality as a gay artist living in the Bronx, and he illustrates his life in a form of a video slide production. He has a comic book called Planet Bronx, and he uses images from pop art, Japanese manga pop art, and his own art mingling together in this short film, dealing with his identity issues growing up as a young adolescent, feeling different from other boys. Well, the painting behind me is based on a lot of different comic book characters that I created when I was in college and up until current. And the characters, each segment of the painting is actually the thoughts of those characters that have been like stirring in my head since the inception of them.
Not only are you an artist, you're also a curator. What did it take to get an event of this magnitude together?
Oh my God! It took a lot of research. It took 5 years in the making of just finding the artists that would fit for the show and getting together people that work well together and visually go together. Well, the whole theme of the show, Dream Sequence, is really about illusions and reality and what is real and what isn't real. So the main character in the painting is almost like a futuristic Krishna-looking character where Krishna is in a dream, and within that dream is a dream within a dream, and each dream that he's having is an actual reality or existing world or dimension. So the inside of our minds as artists, there is a living world, there is a sequence of events that occur that no one else sees except for the artists themselves when they're conjuring up this work. So Dream Sequence is really about the internal mind, the world within the mind that exists in all artists.
name is Melvin Yalagan, and I'm a comic book artist and commercial artist in advertising.
Is there any specific image that you try to show within your comic books, like an ongoing goal or influence that you portray?
Yeah, this was my first book. It's published in 1996 when I was assisting Joe Quesada at the time, who's the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. I had decided to write and illustrate my own story.
What's like a short summary of the comic book that you showed us here?
Oh, it's basically a typical vampire story, typical romantic, dark, comedic comedy that gets more serious and involved, later on.
Drawing usually comes as a talent or sort of a hobby. When did you decide to take drawing to a whole new level and take it as a profession?
I've been drawing since I was a kid, but I never really took it that seriously until I rediscovered it one day when I found this abandoned box full of comics, and they were mostly Image comics, and Joe Quesada's comic Ninjak was there, and I that was my favorite at the time, and I decided to get back into it, and now here I am.
Is there a select audience that you try to portray your comics to, or to even with your advertising? Do you seek for mature audiences, kids, all suitable for all ages? Like, what's your goal with your comic books?
Right now, it's mostly for mature readers that I'm aiming for, because I just can't think of any other stories for kids that I could think of right now. So right now I'm doing more mature stuff and just like riding the flow, going with the waves right now with the mature stuff.
You said that you had friends that were musicians and they tried to portray, push you into that goal. What type of music did you usually play?
Rock. I would say mostly rock, like gothic rock, dark gothic rock.
I noticed that, and it shows that you kind of portray that within your comic books.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's all in there. Bits and pieces of my life is in the comic, and that's just the way it worked out. And like I said, that's how I like to write stories that's sort of loosely based on my life in a way.
My name is Mark Maz. I'm a comic book writer. I'm here with Robert Sidara, who's also a comic book writer. My background is as a trained illustrator. I also function as the art director for the company, as well as the editorial director.
What has influenced your work through the years? Is there a specific image that you've stuck with all your work, or does your work progress throughout the years and show each generation as it is?
Well, I think it's kind of a natural that people would want to tell stories for what interests them now, as versus just telling the same old tired story from years ago. I wrote a story about the Iraq War. It kind of walks the line between, should we be there, should we not be there, why are we there, why are we still there? Yeah, it's a very topical story. I think people definitely, as a creator, I'm definitely influenced by the world around me, and I do want to tell stories that that are relevant to people today.
The main characters are portrayed within your stories. We can say maybe 50 years ago with Spider-Man and Green Lantern and all those other images, that there's a superhero image that's meant for the kids. Are your main characters, can we call them heroes or villains, or are they a new type of breed of hero, a more humanized character?
I think you got that right on the point there. The heroic ideal has changed dramatically in 50 years. Even the ideals of the supporting cast has changed. I can't imagine a hero's wife sitting at home waiting for him to come back from getting his head banged in. It just doesn't happen. People want to hear and learn of stories that, whether they inspire them or relate to them in their real life, they want to have it really be grounded in something that they can relate to. And whether that's you have an urban hero, or you have a hero that comes from a broken family, it's really changed quite a bit.
I've always defined myself as a heroist. I believe in the essence of the hero. I feel that if we didn't have heroes, we would have invented them. My hero when I grew up, I read Spider-Man, and I remember being in high school and marking down on my calendar that Spider-Man came in this month, so he's going to come out 4 weeks from now, give or take, and I knew he came out on a Wednesday, so I rode down to the comic book store and went to pick up the Spider-Man comic book. When I was in my 20s, I remember being in a comic book store and some kid walked in and he picked up the latest copy of Transformers, and he said, I just walked 6 miles to buy this book because it just came out today. And I was like, that was just, it didn't make sense to me because Transformers wasn't a cool book to me in my 20s. When I was older, in my 30s, and I had a son who was younger, he was reading Power Rangers, and to him, that was the cool book. And all of a sudden it hit me that it doesn't matter who the character is, it's a different character for each generation, but each generation will pick its own hero, will decide who it wants to be that character.
Do you still feel that there's an underlying tone within all the heroes of the generations? For example, even though that we've had costume heroes and now these heroes are showing their faces and they're no longer the ideal American that we've seen, that they're more of a darker side, do you still feel that they share some characteristics between each other? For example, while some may be bad in a sense, they still have that must save for the good of the people type image.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that goes in cycles. You have the true heroic ideal happening, you'll have the anti-hero happening, you'll have the hero without an identity, and it goes in a cycle. After a while, people get tired of the heroic ideal, they want to read the anti-hero, then they get tired of the anti-hero because it reminds them of their real life, then they want to read something else. It goes around and around and around in a cycle. So I don't think it's a progression line. I think there's room for a lot of different kind of stories to be told with different kinds of heroes, and I think it's very, very cyclical. Right now, would you say is it people looking for the heroic ideal?